I have told this story more times than I can count, and every time I tell it, my voice does the same thing near the end. It catches. I am an old woman now, and old women are allowed to let their voices catch, so I no longer try to hide it. But let me start where it started. On the evening a wagon stopped at our gate and a man left more behind than he took. We ran a way station back then. My husband Otis and I had sat on the freight road that crawled north out of the basin country, the last stop before the mountains turned the road into a suggestion. We were not a town. We were not even close to a town. We were a long, low house, a barn, a corral, a well, and a gate. People stopped because there was nowhere else to stop. They paid us in coins or in trade, and we fed them and watered their stock and sent them on in the morning. That was the whole of our living, and it was enough. It was late in the year. I remember because the geese had already gone over, that ragged, crying line of them pulling south, and the cottonwoods down by the creek had dropped their leaves into the water. The mornings had teeth. You could see your breath by the time you let the chickens out, and the ground rang hard under your boots. Winter was not here yet, but it had sent word ahead. It was coming, and it would not knock. That evening the light was going copper and low. I was at the front window working the lamp wick, and I saw the wagon before I heard it. A spring wagon, one horse, coming up the road slower than a man in a hurry would drive. I called to Otis that we had company, and I went out to the porch wiping my hands on my apron because that is what you do. You meet people. You see who is coming before they are at your door. The wagon stopped at the gate, not at the porch where wagons stopped. At the gate, a good 40 yards out. That was the first odd thing. A man got down. He came around to the side and reached up and helped a woman climb down, and even from the porch I could see he was not gentle and not rough either. He was quick. He was a man getting a thing done. The woman came down slow, holding the wagon rail, and when she was on the ground she stood there with both hands pressed to the front of her, and I understood at once. She was carrying a child and not early in it, late, heavy with it. I started down off the porch. I thought, they will need help with their things, the road is hard on a woman in her condition. I was halfway across the yard when the man climbed back up onto the seat, took up the reins and drove off. I stopped where I was. I thought I had misread it. I thought maybe he was turning the wagon, going to bring it round to the barn, but he did not turn. He went back down the road the way he had come, and his wheels threw up dust that hung gold in the last of the light, and he did not look back once. Not once. I watched the back of his hat get smaller. The woman stood at the gate and watched it too. She did not call out. She did not run after him, though I do not think she could have run. She just stood with her hands on her belly and her chin up, watching the man go. Then the dust settled, and the road was empty, and she was still there. I have thought about that man many times over the years. I never learned much about him, and what I learned I will tell you when we get to it. But I want to say now plainly that I have known cruel men. I have known men who hit, men who cheated, men who would not feed a dog they owned. This was a different thing. He did not look cruel. That was the worst of it. He looked like a man who had made a decision and was relieved to be done with it. He drove off the way you would drive off after dropping a parcel at the post. Errand finished. And the parcel was a woman about to have a baby, set down at a stranger's gate as the cold came on. I went to her. What else does a person do? I came up and she turned to face me, and I got my first good look. She was young, younger than me, and I was not old then, maybe 20. She had a traveling coat that had been good once and was worn thin now at the cuffs, and a wool shawl over her head, and under the shawl her face was the kind of pale that comes from being tired down to the bone. Her eyes were dry. I want you to understand that. She was not crying. A woman who had just been driven away from at a gate, with night coming, and she was not crying. She had the look of someone who had already cried as much as crying was going to help, and had stopped. "Ma'am," I said, "come inside, it's cold out here and getting colder." She did not move. "I can pay," she said. Her voice was steady. "I have a little money. I am not asking for charity." "Nobody said charity," I told her. "I said come inside. The kettle's already hot." She looked back down the empty road one more time. I will never forget that look. It was not longing. She was not hoping he would come back. She was making sure, I think. Making sure she had seen it right, that the thing was truly done, that there was no more waiting to do. Then she let go of that, the way you let go of a rope when the boat has already left the dock, and she turned and came with me into the house. Her name was Lavinia Cole. She told me that much at the table with her hands around a cup of coffee she did not drink so much as hold for the warmth of it. She told me she had come west in the spring, that she had been promised a home and a name, and that the man who had promised them had changed his mind. She said it flat. No tears in it. The man who drove off, she said, was his cousin, sent to take her off his hands. The man himself had not even come. Otis came in from the barn, and I caught his eye, and we had a whole conversation without a word, the way married people do. He took off his hat. He did not ask questions. He sat down at the far end of the table and let me run it, because he was a sensible man, and he knew that a frightened woman does not need two strangers leaning at her. "You'll stay tonight," I said. "We've a room, we'll sort the rest by daylight. Things look worse in the dark always." "And if they look worse by daylight too," she said. There was no bitterness in it. It was an honest question. She was a practical woman in a terrible spot, and she wanted to know the shape of the trouble she was in. "Then we'll look at them again the day after," I said, "until they wear down to something we can carry." She studied me for a moment. Then she nodded once and she drank some of the coffee. That should have been the end of the evening. A traveler taken in, a bed found, troubles left for the morning. But that same night there was another guest under our roof, and that is where this story truly turns because of who he was. He had come in the day before ahead of her and taken the small room off the kitchen. His name was Reuben Hale, and he was a scout. Not an army scout, not exactly, though he had done that work too. He was the kind of man the freight outfits hired and the cattle outfits hired and the survey parties hired, a man who knew the country the way I knew my own kitchen, where the water was, where the snow drifted deep, and where the wind kept a slope bare, which passes closed first. He had come down out of the high country ahead of the season to winter somewhere lower, the way the smart ones did, and he had stopped with us to rest two tired horses and decide where lower would be. I should describe him because people always ask. He was tall, but not in a way he made much of. He stooped a little through doorways out of long habit. He had a brown beard going gray at the chin and quiet eyes that moved over a room slow and took it in whole. He did not talk much. When he did, his voice was low and even, like a man used to not startling animals. He paid for his keep without fuss, ate what was put in front of him, said thank you and meant it, and otherwise kept to himself by the stove with a piece of harness he was mending. I had not thought much about him at all, beyond nodding he was an easy guest. The easy ones you barely remember. It is the hard ones that stick. That night after Lavinia had gone to her room and Otis had gone to check the stock a last time, Reuben Hale was at the stove with his harness and I was clearing the table. He had not said anything during the meal about what he had surely seen, the woman left at the gate, the whole sad business of it. He was not a man who poked at other people's troubles. But now, with the room quiet, he spoke. "That man who left her," he said, not looking up from the harness. "He say where he was going." "Back the way he came," I said. "That's all I saw." Reuben nodded slowly, like that confirmed something. "There's weather coming," he said. "2 days, maybe 3, real weather, not this." He tipped his head at the window at the ordinary autumn cold. "When it comes, this road closes north of here. The basin fills up and the wind takes the rest. A woman in her state, on foot or in a slow wagon, caught out in that." He let the sentence stop itself. He did not need to finish it. We both knew how it finished. "She's not going north," I said. "She's not going anywhere tonight." "No," he agreed, "but she'll want to go somewhere soon. Pride'll push her, I've seen it. A person feels like a burden, they'd rather walk into a storm than sit at a stranger's table feeling like one." He set the harness down then and looked at me, and for the first time I saw how carefully he had been watching the whole evening, this quiet man by the stove. "She have anyone?" he asked. "Anywhere she's headed, that's real, not a hope, a place." I thought about what Lavinia had told me, a man who had promised and gone back on it, a home that turned out to be no home, a name she had been told would be hers, given to someone else, or kept, or never offered at all. No, I said, I don't believe she does. He was quiet a long while after that. The fire ticked. Somewhere out in the dark Otis was talking low to the horses, the way he did. And Reuben Hale sat there turning something over, and I did not know what it was, and I did not ask, because some thoughts a man has to walk all the way around himself before he can say them out loud. That was the first night. I want to pause here and tell you something because it matters to the rest. When Lavinia came to us, I felt sorry for her the way anyone would, but I also felt underneath the pity a small cold thing I am not proud of, a worry. Winter coming, our stores only so deep, a woman about to need more than a bed, a child on the way that would need feeding and warming and everything a child needs, and no money behind any of it that we could see. I am being honest with you. I am telling you the small, ugly arithmetic that runs in the back of even a decent person's head. Another mouth, another body to keep alive through the worst months. I did not say it. I would have been ashamed to say it, but it was there. What I want you to notice is that Reuben Hale did that same arithmetic. He was a man who lived by knowing what the country would do, by counting days of feed and miles of trail and how long a thing would last. He could count better than anyone I ever met. He counted what it would cost to help her, and then he chose to pay it. But I am getting ahead. That night, nothing was decided. That night was just a frightened woman in a borrowed bed, and a quiet man at a stove, and me wiping down a table, and the cold standing outside the door like it was waiting for someone to make a mistake. In the morning, the trouble showed its face. Lavinia was up before me, which is saying something because I am up before the birds. I came into the kitchen and she was already there, dressed, her hair pinned, her thin coat buttoned to the throat. She had a small bag at her feet. She had the look of a woman about to leave. I want to thank you, she said. You've been kinder than you needed to be. I'll be on my way as soon as it's light enough to see the road. On your way to where? I asked. She did not have an answer ready, and I watched her not have it. There is a town 2 days north, she finally said. She had heard there was work there for a woman in a house, cooking and washing. She would find something. 2 days north, I said, is right into the weather that's coming, and you in your condition. I tried to say it gentle. Lavinia, sit down, have something to eat. Nobody's putting you out. You came in last night thinking the bottom had dropped out of the world, and I won't pretend it hadn't. But the answer to a hole isn't to jump in a deeper one. Her chin came up. There it was, the pride Reuben had named. I won't be a burden, she said. I have been a burden to one household already, and look how that ended. I won't do it again. I'd rather take my chances on the road than sit here eating what isn't mine and watching you all calculate how long I'll last. It was almost exactly what he had said she'd say, word for word, near enough. And he was there. He had come in quiet the way he did and was standing by the door with his hat in his hand. I do not know how long he had been listening. Long enough. You won't last 2 days on that road, he said, plain, not unkind. The way he'd tell a man the river was too high to cross. I've scouted it. The first storm fills the basin and the wind does the rest. You'd not get halfway. And if you did, the town you're thinking of has a house, all right, but it's not the kind that hires a woman to cook. He let that sit a second. I'm telling you what's true so you can decide on what's true and not on what you wish. Lavinia looked at him. I think it was the first time she had really looked at him. And what's it to you, she said, what road I take? Nothing, he said, and everything, I suppose, now that I've said my piece. Because if you walk out that door and into that weather, I'll know I watched you do it, and I'm too old to add that to the pile. He turned the hat in his hands. He was working up to something, and I held still, and even the fire seemed to hold still. I've a place, he said. South of here, 2 days the easy way in a valley out of the wind. A cabin, some stock. Land I've held a few years and worked when I'm not scouting. It's no fine thing, but it's tight and it's warm and there's feed laid in for the winter. I built it for one man and it's been one man's a long time. He stopped, started again. I'm not a young man and I'm not a smooth one and I'll not pretend this is the kind of offer a woman dreams of, but I'm offering it honest. You'd have a roof. The child would have a roof. Come spring, if you wanted to go your own way, you'd go with my blessing and a horse under you. And if you wanted to stay, he did not finish that. He just looked at her and let her finish it herself, however she wanted to. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the kettle thinking about boiling. Lavinia did not soften. I want to be truthful about her. She was not a woman who melted. She had been promised a home before by a smoother man with a nicer offer, and that home had turned out to be a wagon ride to a stranger's gate. She had every reason in the world to hear this offer and see another trap in it. Why, she said, just that, why? Reuben thought about it. He was not a man to give an easy answer to make a thing go down smooth. Because I can, he said at last. Most can't when it comes down to it. Most are scraping by themselves, or they've got their own troubles, or they're afraid of what folks would say. I've none of those reasons. I've room and feed and no one to answer to. So the only thing standing between you and a warm winter is whether I'm willing. And I am. He shrugged the smallest motion. There's no riddle in it. A thing's in my power to do and it ought to be done, so I'll do it. That's the whole of it. I have heard a great many fine speeches in my life. That was not a fine speech. It was a plain one, but I have never forgotten it because it was true all the way down, and you do not hear that as often as you would hope. Lavinia was quiet a long time. When she spoke, her voice had changed just a little. The flatness in it had a crack in it now. And what will people say, she said, of a woman who goes off to a man's cabin, carrying a child that's not his, with no words said over them? I'll say what they like, Reuben said. They always do. But there's a circuit preacher comes through the valley by Christmas, and if you wanted words said, words can be said, and then they can say what they like about a married woman, which is less interesting to them. A corner of his mouth moved. It was almost a smile. Or no words, and you my housekeeper for the winter with your own door that bolts from your side. However you want it. The roof's the same roof either way. I'd not have you trade one trap for another. You choose the terms, every one of them. That's the only way I'd take it. I tell you, it was the door that bolts from her side that did it, not the offer of marriage. A lesser man would have led with the marriage, because a lesser man wants to be the rescuer in the story, wants the woman to need him. Reuben led with the bolt on her own door. He offered her, first of all, the power to keep him out. And I watched Lavinia hear that, and I watched something in her shoulders come down half an inch, the first easing I had seen in her since the wagon drove off. I'll think on it, she said. Think on it, he agreed. But think quick. The weather won't wait on either of us, and I'd want us off this road and into that valley before it closes. 2 days, we'd just make it. 3, we'd be cutting it fine. She thought on it through the morning. She thought on it while she helped me with the bread, because she would not sit idle. She was not made that way. She thought on it while Reuben checked his horses and Otis mended the corral rail. And I will tell you when she decided, because it was a small thing and I happened to see it. In the afternoon she went out to the corral. Reuben was there with the 2 horses he'd been resting, and a third, a stout little mare with a kind eye. Lavinia stood at the rail. I was at the window. I could not hear them, but I did not need to. He pointed at the little mare, and then he made a motion, a careful slow motion with his hand low, like a thing being lifted down gentle. And then he made another, like a thing being settled soft. And I understood he was telling her, this is the mare you'd ride, she's the steady one. I'd not let you bounce on a hard road in your condition. He was thinking, you see, about the 2-day ride, about her body and the child in it, before she had even said yes. He was already protecting a thing he had no claim on, planning for a journey she had not agreed to take. Lavinia reached over the rail and laid her hand on the little mare's nose, and she nodded, and that was the yes. No words I could hear, just a hand on a horse and a nod, and a man who had offered her a bolt for her own door. They left the next morning, the 3 horses, the 2 of them, and a packhorse. Otis sold them cheap with feed and blankets and what we could spare from the stores. I wept when they went. I am not ashamed of it. Lavinia took both my hands at the gate, the very gate she'd been left at not 2 days before, and she said, "You stopped me from making a fool's run into the snow. I won't forget it." And I said something foolish back, I don't recall what, and Otis stood there holding his hat, and Reuben Hale touched his brim to us and said, "We'll send word in the spring when the road opens." And they went south into the valley, out of the wind, ahead of the weather. The weather came the day after. It came just as he'd said it would, a wall of gray dropping out of the north and the wind behind it, and by nightfall you could not see the barn from the house. It blew 3 days. Snow filled the basin to the fence tops. The road north closed, and I stood at the window in that white roaring nothing and thought of the town 2 days north that Lavinia had meant to walk to. And I thanked God, plain and simple, that a quiet man had counted the days right and had been willing to pay what helping her cost. But I have not told you the hardest part, because helping is never just the day you decide to help. Helping is all the days after, when the trouble you took on shows you everything it really is. And the trouble Reuben Hale took on was not finished. It had only just begun. I did not see those next months myself, but Lavinia told me later, in the spring, sitting at my table with a different look on her face than she'd worn that first night. And what she told me is the part of this story I have carried longest. The valley was everything he'd said and a little more. The cabin sat where the slope broke the wind, with a creek that did not freeze solid, and a stand of timber for fuel, and a barn dug halfway into the hillside so the warmth of the stock would hold. He'd built it careful, a man planning to be alive in February, which is a different kind of building than a man throwing up walls for a season. There was feed laid in, just as he'd said. There was a smokehouse with meat in it. He had not boasted. If anything, he'd undersold it, which Lavinia said was the most surprising thing of all, a man who promised less than he had. He kept every word about the door. He hung a bolt on the inside of the small room he gave her with his own hands the first afternoon before he'd even seen to his horses. He showed her how it worked, and then he left her alone in it. And then he slept those first weeks in the barn, in with the stock in the cold, and would not hear a word against it. Because, he said, a woman ought to feel the house was hers before she had to share it with anyone. And there'd be time enough later to sort the rest, if there was a later, and if there wasn't, the barn suited him fine. Now I want to tell you about the hardest stretch, because this is where you learn what a man is made of. It is easy to be kind for an afternoon at a way station, with witnesses and the warmth of a good deed fresh on you. It is another thing to be kind in the dead of winter, snowed in, with a stranger in your house and her time coming and no doctor within 40 frozen miles. Her time came in January. It came early, and it came in a storm, because that is how these things go. They wait for the worst possible night and then they begin. Lavinia woke in the dark with the pains on her and the wind screaming and the snow against the window like sand thrown by a hard hand, and she was afraid. She told me she was more afraid than she had ever been, more than at the gate even, because at the gate she had only her own life to lose, and now there were two of them, and one had not even drawn breath yet. Reuben heard her through the wall, or sensed it the way he sensed everything. He came and stood outside her bolted door and asked, low through the wood, was it time? And she said yes. And then he did a thing she said she would remember on her own deathbed. He did not try the door. He did not push in to take charge, to be the man of the house running the show. He stood on the other side of a bolt she controlled, and he said, "There's a woman, Mrs. Tolliver, 8 miles down the valley. She's birthed half the children in this country. I can be there and back before dawn if I go now. Or I can stay, and we manage it ourselves, just the two of us, and I'll do whatever you tell me to do and not one thing more. It's your choice. Tell me which, and that's what I'll do." 8 miles in that storm, in the dark. He was offering, as easy as offering to fetch water, to ride 16 miles through a blizzard that had killed grown men a mile from their own barns. And he was offering it as a choice, hers to make, not a thing he'd decided for her. She told him to go for the woman, and he went. I cannot tell you that ride because no one saw it, and Reuben Hale never spoke of it, not once, not to me, not to her, not in all the years after. A man like that does the hard thing and then puts it away and does not take it out to be admired. But I know the country and I know that storm by reputation, and I know that he found the Tolliver place in the black and the white of it, where another man would have ridden in circles till he froze, because he knew the land the way I know my kitchen. And I know he brought that midwife back, the two of them on horses through drifts to the animals' chests, and that they came into that cabin near dawn caked white and half frozen, and that Mrs. Tolliver got her hands warm by the fire and then went in to Lavinia. The child was born that morning, a girl, small but sound, with a cry that Lavinia said cut clean through the howl of the wind, the most welcome sound she had ever heard. And when it was over and the baby was wrapped and Lavinia was resting, exhausted and alive, and a mother, Reuben Hale, stood in the doorway of that room, the door she'd unbolted now and left open, and looked at the two of them, and Lavinia watched his face. She said he did not look like a proud man, or a triumphant one, or a man owed anything. He looked, she said, like a man who had been alone a very long time and had forgotten what a full house sounded like, and was hearing it again, and did not quite trust it. He asked after a while, did the child have a name? And Lavinia said not yet. And he nodded and said names should not be rushed, and went out to see to the horses that had carried them through the night, because they had earned their feed and more. That circuit preacher Reuben had mentioned could not get through till April, when the road opened. So there were no words said over Reuben and Lavinia that winter. They were not married when the child was born. They were two people the snow had locked in together, a man in the barn and a woman in the house, and a baby between them that belonged to neither of them in the way the world counts belonging. And I think that winter, with no word said and no claim made, is where the true thing grew, not from rescue. Lavinia had been rescued before, or promised rescue, and seen what it was worth. This was different. This was a man who fetched wood and never asked for thanks, who learned to walk a colicky baby up and down so a tired woman could sleep, who taught Lavinia to read the weather and snare a rabbit, and never once made her feel she was learning it as charity, who kept to the barn until the day she came out and asked him, of her own choosing, to come in out of the cold and sit by his own fire in his own house like a fool. What was he doing out there? By the time the road opened, Lavinia told me. The bolt on her door had not been thrown in 2 months, not because he'd asked, because she'd stopped feeling the need of it, and that, she said, was the whole of how she knew. They were married in April, when the preacher came through, in the cabin, with the Tollivers standing up for them and the baby asleep in a basket. Lavinia sent word with a freighter, and the word reached us at the way station in May, and I read it to Otis at the table where she had once sat refusing to be a burden, and I will not tell you I read it dry-eyed because I did not. I saw her again that summer. They came north to the station on their way to sell some stock, the three of them, and I tell you I did not know her at first. She had filled out, gone brown from the sun, and she had a way of laughing that I had not heard a hint of that cold night at the gate. The baby was fat and furious and beautiful. And Reuben Hale stood in my yard with his hand resting easy on the little mare's neck, the same little mare, and he looked at his wife and his daughter, and the quiet in him was not a lonely quiet any more. It was a full one. A man who had counted the cost of helping and found, in the end, that he had not lost a thing by paying it. He had gained the whole rest of his life. I asked Lavinia while the men loaded the wagon whether she ever thought about the one who left her, the cousin who drove off, the man who never came. She was quiet a moment. Then she said, no, not the way I meant. She said she used to think she'd been thrown away at that gate, but she'd come to see it differently. She'd come to see that the man who drove off had not thrown her away. He had set her down. In the one place, on the one evening, where the one man who would do right by her happened to be resting 2 tired horses. She did not believe in much, she said, but she had come to believe that some doors only open because another one slams shut behind you, hard enough to leave you standing in the cold long enough for the right one to find you. I have kept that. I have repeated it to every frightened young woman who has come through my door in the years since, and there have been more than a few, because trouble knows the way to a way station. And I tell them Lavinia's story, the woman left at the gate with a child on the way, who faced the cold, until a quiet man who counted the cost decided she was worth what helping her would take. He is gone now, Reuben Hale. He went a few winters back, old and warm in his own bed in that valley out of the wind, with his wife's hand in his and his daughter grown and standing by. Lavinia wrote me. She said he was not afraid at the end, that he'd looked at his life the way he used to look at country he'd scouted, taking it in whole, and seemed satisfied with what he saw. She said the last thing he told her was that he'd had the best of the bargain. After all those years, he still thought he'd had the best of it, that he'd given a roof and got a life, that he'd come out ahead. I am an old woman, and I have seen a great many people do a great many things to each other, the cruel and the kind, the ones who drive off and the ones who open the door. And if you ask me what I have learned from all of it, I will tell you this, and then I will let my voice catch, because I have earned the right to. The cold does not care who you are. It comes for everyone sooner or later, and it does not knock. But there are people in this world who, when they see you standing out in it, do not weigh whether you deserve their fire. They just open the door. They are rarer than you'd hope and quieter than you'd expect, and you will not always recognize them because they do not look like rescue. They look like a tired man by a stove, mending harness, counting days. But they are the whole reason any of us makes it through the winter at all. And I hope, when your cold comes, that there is one of them resting their horses at the gate,